Alright, I'm back and I'm ready to add some texture to this. If you can see, it now has a lot of relief. Maybe if I hold it sideways, I don't know if you can see just how deep it is. But it's now got a lot of relief and it's ready for some patterns and textures. For this, I think the textures of the fish will probably be like fish scales, and the textures of the negative space, I would say just kind of waves or swirls, because after all, he is in water, right? So for the texture, we want to use a pointy tool. Just make sure it's not so sharp that it's going to puncture what you do. I've got really skinny little wooden sticks or bigger wooden sticks whose point is a little bit blunter. And then I've got this tooling tool, metal tooling tool, I don't know what else to call it, that I got a few years ago that's got a nice point on it, and I could use that. And the simple thing is to remember, and I'm going to use just one sheet of felt underneath right now, and to put the texture on the negative space, the part that's flat, I'm going to work from the front. So I will simply use this tool and pressing into one layer of felt, I'm going to make my little wavy lines all throughout the background to represent water waves. I don't know if you can see them, all right? I've done some over here. If I want to make some kind of swirling around, I can. It's really just like drawing line designs. Depending on what it is that you're doing, you might want to have a specific plan of action of how to proceed. This is relatively simple since it is not a large amount of negative space here at all. But remember, working on the negative space, the part that is flattened, work from the front. So you're pushing kind of with it and not against it. And I've got that almost all done. Do you have to texture all the negative space? No, you can leave some areas flat, but make sure at least they've been worked with the tool by flattening down. By the time this is done, there should be no area on it that hasn't been tooled, because when we go to add ink to antique it, the ink will take much better anywhere where the surface has been worked with a tool. So I've got my negative space all covered with just kind of wavy lines, and now I'm ready to do the fish. Anytime I'm working on areas that are poofed out, I don't want to press in with the tool or I'm just going to break it or squash it. I want to work with what I've got, so I'm going to turn it over and work from the back. And again, just one layer of felt should be plenty. And I'm going to just give my fish some little scales. And I'm just doing some like little sideways U shapes, kind of in a repeated design, something that I can do relatively quickly. You know, you can plan these things out on your drawing ahead of time, but you just don't want to draw them in until now. And I'm about have those done enough, because this is really just a sample for you. I might want to make some lines in my fins. Maybe not. I could also make, if I wanted to make like a real, I can't think of the word for it, a texture that's got little tiny little bumps in it. Maybe I'll try it in one of these bubbles so you can see. I can almost hammer with the point of my tool, and all those little bumps will form like little raised nubs. It'll also work if I wanted to do that on parts that are pressed in, and I'll just do a little piece of it here, so again, so you can see what it looks like on the finished product. And I think I'm going to leave the bubbles clear with maybe just one or two little kind of lines to kind of reflect their circular shape. And then I'm going to say that, my goodness, I've got this thing pretty filled with textures. I mean, maybe I have it even filled with textures. And I'm going to show you how we put the ink on it now. Now, some people at this point prefer to just color them with Sharpies. I am personally not a fan of the way it looks, but if that's what you want to do, that's fine. I think the ink, by putting ink on it, which is going to fall into the crevices and get removed from the top surfaces, really accentuates your design, highlights all the texture, and just gives it a really cool look. You can also add color other ways that I'll talk about, but this is what I ultimately prefer to do. The Sharpie thing just, it's not my taste. So, anyhow, here's what I've got. Ink is messy, so I've got some paper to cover my table. I've got some ink in here, and I've got a brush that's already wet and kind of dirty looking. And I've got a bar of soap that was from a hotel, and no, it wasn't black like that when I first opened it up. That's black from ink, because I'm going to be using it in here. If you just paint ink on the surface of this foil, the metal foil will cause the ink to bead up and draw away, and it won't stick very well. So you'll take your wet brush and just take some soap and this is a terrible brush that I've picked. I don't know why I picked that, but I've got another one right here that I can use. So I'm just going to rub it on the surface of my soap, which this brush has some ink in it too. And I'm just going to kind of brush it around all over the whole thing. And I probably should have put on a rubber glove or something, because I'm about to get ink all over me, because I'm a really messy artist. So now I'm going to dip into my ink and just keep painting it on. And if there are places where it seems like it doesn't want to stick, I can always just rub my brush back on my soap. One year when I was doing this in the classroom, I forgot the bars of hotel soap. So I had this grand idea that we were going to use the soap in the dispensers, the liquid soap in the dispensers in the classroom. It worked. Unfortunately, it doesn't dry the same way, and the projects all retained a surface greasiness that I found really kind of offensive. So I don't necessarily recommend that. I don't know if you can see this. So I've got it almost all dry. Now, a little place is drawing away here, so I'm just going to add a little soap to those places where the ink is trying to draw away. And then you have a couple of choices for what to do. Actually, 3 choices. If you're in a really big hurry, you can take a blow dryer and blow dry it off. And I've done that frequently. Blow dry it off really fast so that you can do the final step. The only problem with that is I tend to get rather aggressive with it, and I get really close to it, and as a result it gets really hot and some of the ink bubbles up in places, and it's hard to get rid of that bubbly look on the ink. So if you don't want it, don't do that. Some people like to take a paper towel and at this point remove some of the ink from the surface, which works fine, but I tend to get my hands totally black doing that, and I've already got a few black fingers, so I don't really want to do that. So what I'm going to do is just let it dry naturally, or maybe gently blow it dry with the blow dryer once I turn this video off. And then what I'll be doing is taking some of this steel wool. And I'm not going to demonstrate the steel wool on video because it's kind of a tedious thing to watch, but making sure my table is covered because it is going to be messy. I will take my steel wool and start gently in circular motion wiping. Gently. You can remove as much or as little ink as you want. You might just want the surface lines to be removed and most of it to be dark. You might want to remove it more in some areas than others. For example, I might want to really shine up my bubbles and the outer edge. So as you go, you can do that. And as you're doing that, you're going to want to occasionally pick it up and shake it off so that you don't have all this ink, dried ink on there. And what you're going to be shaking off is a mix of powdered dry ink and also steel wool shavings. So really make sure your tables are covered, and make sure when you're done with that the edges are kind of bundled in to take it to the garbage and throw away, so that if you're doing this in a classroom, nobody just picks up the paper like that and ends up with steel wool and ink filings all over the place, because it can be really messy. Now, once this dries, I'll do the final step, and I'll take care of that, and I will post that image so that you can see how it looks. But really, that's all there is to it. It's much easier than you thought, isn't it? Just remember that when you're tooling, to always take care of flattening down the flat edges, to redefining edges with a pointy tool so that your shapes remain clear and defined. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to see what the image is. So by really clearly defining shapes as you push forward and flatten, it will really help a lot. That's it. I hope you learned something.